Singapore plans to tap regional power grids to import more electricity in the future. Now, it has plans that could potentially see imports make up to 60% of Singapore's energy mix. For more on Singapore's future power plans, Wei Su is joined by Choi Shing Kwok. He's chairman of the Energy 2050 Committee. And he's also the director and CEO of the Institute for Southeast Asian Studies, Yusof Ishak Institute.
Mr. Choi, let's pick up on that point that Dawn mentioned, the import of renewable electricity from regional power grids. In your words, that makes sense. Why?
Well, it makes sense because studies have shown that Southeast Asia as a region actually has a surplus of renewable energy resources if they're all fully developed, but they are not in the appropriate places where the demand is. So in order to overcome this, there needs to be some import from some countries and some exports from some other countries. It's just like any other commodity. If you have too much, you want to export. You have too little, you want to import. So it makes sense for Singapore to import.
Mr. Choi, one of the other recommendations, apart from importing electricity, was a national strategy for hydrogen in Singapore. Because the big thing, the problem with hydrogen is high cost in production, equipment and logistics. What makes it still viable in Singapore? What do we need to do to make it viable here?
Well, I think the state of technology development for hydrogen is that it is a very promising technology that can replace fossil fuels. So going forward, hydrogen is, I would say, one of the very, very likely candidates to replace fossil fuels. However, not all the technologies that are needed for the entire supply chain for hydrogen exist yet today, not in the scale that is needed. So there needs to be more investment into R&D, there needs to be more investment into industrialization, but it is a matter of time that all this can be overcome. There are also other challenges to overcome, such as how to transport hydrogen in large enough quantities over long distances. But again, these technologies are being developed right now, and so it's likely to emerge in the next decade or so. And thirdly, I think you mentioned infrastructure. There definitely needs to be infrastructure because you can't adapt current infrastructure to use with hydrogen. So there needs to be new infrastructure. So optimistically, I would say over the next 10 to 15 years, with the right amount of investments into the technologies, it will become viable. And when that happens, then prices will drop. And as the scale of deployment increases even more globally, then those uncertainties would go away and prices will come to where they are very viable for deployment everywhere.
Mr. Choi, you're speaking of the most optimistic scenarios. We know there should be more investment in the infrastructure we need to make the most of not just hydrogen, but also one of the other recommendations was solar power maximization in Singapore. But we are clearly not getting it as yet. Why are we not getting it? And what would get in the way of our getting this kind of investment we need to make this kind of infrastructure?
Well, so for the maximization of solar power in Singapore, again, some of the technologies we're looking for today are not yet mature. So what we're talking about is that we can make today's solar panels more efficient. And that is happening continuously in the laboratory, and it will be deployed into production. It's a matter of time that as the panels become more efficient, then it makes sense for us to replace older panels with newer ones, which will generate more power. So over time, we can continue to do this and grow the amount of electricity we can draw from the solar panels that we have. In addition, there are also other ways in which solar maximization can take place, such as by deploying into innovative new forms of deployment, such as on vertical spaces instead of just horizontal spaces. And in addition to that, you can, in future, perhaps even look at road surfaces that could be also surfaces where solar generation can take place. Today's new solar panels actually are like a kind of a fabric. You can actually roll it out, you can unroll it over any surface, and then you can generate electricity from that. So this is just the early phase of new development as far as solar panels are concerned. And going forward, there's a lot more potential. But what you say is correct, that no matter how much we invest in this, it will not be enough to make all the renewable energy that we need here in Singapore. So we have to depend on other sources besides solar. Investment, I think, will come as the situation drives us towards having to shift out more and more carbon. Then I think those investments will come, and as technologies mature, the prices of those technologies will drop, and that becomes more viable.
And thanks so much for all that, Mr. Choi Shing Kwok, Chairman of the Energy 2050 Committee.